The girl with only one dress. The morning sun crept slowly through the narrow window of a small apartment on the edge of the city. Inside, Aisha stood before an old mirror, one hand holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, the other smoothing the wrinkles from her only formal dress, a simple navy blue outfit she had worn to every interview she ever dared to attend. It wasn't fashionable and it wasn't new, but it was clean, ironed, and carried the quiet dignity of someone who refused to give up, no matter how many doors had been shut in her face. Today was different, though. Today she wasn't going for an interview. She had finally been hired. As an assistant at one of the largest corporate offices in the city, a place she had once walked past and whispered to herself, one day. That day had come, and though her heart trembled with anxiety, her eyes shone with hope. She took one last look at the cracked mirror, pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and whispered to herself, "You're not lucky. Aisha, you're prepared." Then she stepped out into the dusty street, holding her small handbag close to her chest. The city roared awake around her, buses honking, vendors shouting, and hurried footsteps echoing on the pavement. But inside her, everything was silent, steady, like the calm before a storm. She wasn't just walking to a job. She was walking toward a life she had built with every tear, every rejection, and every sleepless night she had spent wondering if her sacrifices were worth it. When she arrived at the grand glass building of Eminence Corp., she hesitated before the tall revolving doors. Through the reflection on the glass, she could see her own face, simple, tired, but determined. Behind her reflection, the people inside looked sharp, confident, wrapped in suits and perfumes that spoke of privilege. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I belong here too." Then she pushed through. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, polished floors, and expensive ambition. The receptionist gave her a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes and handed her an ID badge. The photo on it looked awkward, but when Aisha pinned it on her dress, it felt like armor. Her first day was a blur of introductions, instructions, and glances that lingered a little too long. Some colleagues were polite, others indifferent, but one group of young interns whispered behind her back. She didn't need to hear every word. She could feel the laughter in their tone. "Same dress every day?" One girl sneered softly as Aisha passed by. The words stung, but she kept walking. Not because she didn't care, but because she had learned long ago that dignity was louder than gossip. Her desk was near the window, and she loved it instantly. The view of the city skyline reminded her of how far she'd come. From a small-town school where she had studied under flickering lights, to now, working in one of the tallest buildings in the city. Her tasks were small, scheduling meetings, sorting files, managing emails, but she treated each one like it mattered. When she placed papers neatly on her manager's desk, she thought of her late father who used to say, "Whatever work you do it with pride because pride doesn't cost money, but it earns respect." By afternoon, she had already made a quiet impression. Her manager, Mr. Rehan, a composed man in his 40s known for his no-nonsense attitude, watched her from a distance. She didn't know it yet, but he noticed the way she spoke, never rushing, never complaining, and the way she stayed late after lunch to finish what others left undone. But what impressed him most wasn't her speed. It was her humility. While most new hires asked for recognition, she asked only for a chance to learn. The office cafeteria buzzed with laughter and chatter during lunch. Aisha found a quiet corner by the window with her small lunchbox. Rice and lentils, simple and homemade. A few colleagues passed by with trays full of food from the company buffet, but none stopped to sit with her. She smiled anyway. When you've spent years being invisible, silence becomes your friend. But fate has a strange sense of timing. That was the moment when a voice broke the rhythm of her solitude. "Do you mind if I sit here?" It was a woman from the HR department, graceful and warm. Her name was Miriam, and she had noticed Aisha during the morning orientation. "You looked like you could use some company," she said with a kind smile. That simple gesture was enough to melt the ice of loneliness Aisha had been carrying all day. They talked, not about work, but about dreams, families, and how hard it is to build something from nothing. For the first time in a long while, Aisha laughed, really laughed, and Miriam joined her. When she returned to her desk, the afternoon sunlight poured through the window, casting long golden lines on the floor. She leaned back in her chair for a moment, looking out at the city she once feared. She had survived the whispers, the judgments, and the invisible walls of class, but something deep inside told her that this was just the beginning. There were bigger challenges ahead, ones that would test not just her strength but her heart. The day ended with a soft hum of computers shutting down and footsteps fading into the hallway. As she packed her bag, she noticed a small sticky note on her desk. "Good job today. Keep it up," or her heart skipped. It was from her manager. She smiled. Not because someone noticed her, but because it was proof that integrity never goes unnoticed for long. On the way home, the bus was crowded, but she didn't mind. The city lights reflected on the window beside her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She was part of something now. Her mind wandered back to that one cruel comment about her dress, and she smiled faintly. Let them laugh, she thought. One day she would have a wardrobe full of clothes, but she would never forget the one dress that started it all. That night, when she placed her dress neatly on the chair beside her bed, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The world had never handed her anything easily, but perhaps that was her gift. Because every step she took forward she earned, and deep down, she knew that no matter what challenges tomorrow brought, she would face them with the same weapon she had always carried, her dignity. Outside her window, the city didn't sleep, and neither did her dreams. The coffee that changed everything. The next few weeks passed like a quiet storm in Aisha's life, steady on the outside, but turbulent within. Every morning she woke up before dawn, pressed her one blue dress to perfection, and caught the same bus that rattled through the same streets, filled with faces that never looked up. She knew her routine by heart, yet there was something inside her that refused to let life turn mechanical. Each day she whispered the same line in the mirror before leaving her apartment. "You're not just working for a paycheck. You're building your story." The office had begun to recognize her now. Her consistency, her politeness, and her almost obsessive attention to detail had made her quietly reliable. Her manager, Mr. Rehan, had started assigning her more responsibility, reports that others avoided, meetings that required preparation, and sometimes confidential files that needed her discretion. Though he seldom praised her aloud, his trust was visible in the way he stopped checking her work. But not everyone appreciated her growing reputation. The small group of interns who once mocked her dress now whispered louder. They saw her as a threat, a reminder that effort could outshine connections. One of them, Sana, who prided herself on her designer bags and father's influence in the company, began to pick small fights cloaked in politeness. "Aisha, can you please handle this? You're good with small tasks," she'd say with a thin smile that cut sharper than insult. Aisha, as always, would nod gently and take the file without a word. But what Sana didn't realize was that Aisha's silence wasn't weakness, it was focus. She wasn't there to win arguments. She was there to build her future quietly, brick by brick. One cold Monday morning, the office buzzed with tension. The company was hosting an event at a famous downtown cafe to welcome an important client, a business tycoon known for his ruthless efficiency and sharp instincts. Everyone was excited, and rumors flew across the office. "He's young, brilliant, and unbelievably rich," someone whispered near the printer. "And single," another added with a giggle. Aisha barely paid attention. She was busy preparing the presentation materials and checking the list of attendees, making sure everything was perfect before the team left for the cafe. When she finally reached the venue later that morning, she felt out of place immediately. The cafe gleamed with marble counters and golden lights. The walls carried the aroma of roasted coffee and power. Men in tailored suits and women in sleek dresses filled the air with laughter that came from confidence money buys. Aisha, in her simple blue dress, looked like she had walked in from another world. She quietly took her place at the side, carrying folders and documents, content to observe rather than be seen. Then the door opened, and the room shifted. Conversations paused, and eyes turned toward the tall figure entering with a calm that commanded attention. The man's presence was magnetic, not loud but steady, like a wave that didn't need to crash to be felt. Aisha looked up, and for a moment time stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. The sharp jaw, the familiar eyes that once looked at her across a classroom desk years ago. It was Arav, her first love. The last time she had seen him, they were both young, full of dreams, sitting under the old banyan tree behind their college, promising to meet again when they had made something of themselves. But life had other plans. He went abroad on a scholarship. She stayed behind, her family's circumstances pulling her into survival instead of ambition. She had often wondered what had become of him, whether he remembered her. Now as she watched him shake hands with her manager, surrounded by cameras and applause, she realized he had become someone the world admired. And she was just an assistant serving coffee at the same table. Arav hadn't noticed her yet. He was focused, professional, and spoke with the quiet assurance of someone used to being in control. The meeting began, and Aisha moved silently, refilling cups, handing over files, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But inside, her heart was a battlefield. Memories flashed like lightning. His laughter, his promises, the way he once told her she would conquer the world with her kindness. She wanted to disappear, but fate wasn't done with her yet. As she approached with a tray of coffee, one of the interns, Sana, of course, smirked and whispered just loud enough, "Careful. Aisha, don't spill it on the boss." It was meant to embarrass her, and as if destiny decided to test her patience, her hand trembled slightly, and a few drops of coffee spilled. Not on anyone, but on the edge of the client's file. Gasps filled the air. For a moment, all eyes turned toward her. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, quickly taking out a tissue. But before she could clean it, a calm voice spoke, cutting through the tension. "It's fine," Arav said, his tone gentle but firm. Everyone froze. He had finally looked at her. His gaze softened, confusion flickering in his eyes as recognition dawned. "Aisha." His lips almost formed the word, but he stopped himself. The air felt heavier. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. But in those silent seconds, 1,000 memories passed between them. Of laughter, heartbreak, and unspoken dreams. Aisha stepped back, lowering her eyes, wishing the floor would swallow her. The meeting continued, but she could feel his gaze on her more than once. After it ended, as everyone packed up, Arav approached her quietly. "It's been a long time," he said softly. She froze, unsure how to respond. "You haven't changed," he added with a faint smile. She forced a polite nod, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you're doing well, sir." The word "sir" hung between them like a wall. He looked at her for a moment longer, something unreadable in his eyes. Regret, maybe? Then said, "You always were too humble." And then he left, walking out with his entourage, leaving her standing in a corner filled with noise but feeling utterly alone. That night, as she walked home through the cold wind, Aisha felt the ache of something deeper than heartbreak. It was the ache of realization. The boy she had once loved had become a man the world admired, while she was still fighting to prove she belonged. Yet beneath that ache there was also a strange peace, because though he had risen high, she had not fallen. She had survived, worked, endured, and she knew that her story wasn't over. The next day she came to the office as usual, in her same blue dress, her same quiet grace. But now, there was a fire in her heart, a determination to rise, not to be seen by him again, but to become someone who would never need to look down in anyone's presence. She didn't know it yet, but the universe had just written the first line of her new chapter. And this time it would not be about lost love. It would be about finding herself. The billionaire's quiet regret. The days following that cafe meeting felt strangely disjointed for both of them. For Aisha, it was as if her heart had been thrown into the air and left suspended between what was and what could never be. She tried to convince herself that seeing Arav again was just a fleeting moment of fate, something meant to remind her that she had to focus on her present, not her past. But every night, as she lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment, she couldn't help but replay that moment, his eyes, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name after all those years. It had stirred something deep inside her, something she thought she had buried beneath years of struggle and quiet endurance. Meanwhile, Arav couldn't shake off the image of her either. When he had walked into that cafe and seen her standing there in her simple blue dress, serving coffee while everyone else flaunted wealth and pride, something inside him cracked. He remembered the girl who used to sit beside him during lectures, her hair tied back with a ribbon, her notebook filled with dreams instead of doodles. He remembered the way she used to talk about wanting to open a small library one day, a place where anyone, rich or poor, could come and find a piece of hope in a book. She had been gentle, yes, but also fierce in her quiet way. And now, seeing her like that, humble, unnoticed, yet carrying herself with quiet dignity, he realized how deeply she had imprinted herself on his soul. That night, as he sat alone in his high-rise apartment overlooking the glittering city, Arav felt an ache that even success couldn't soothe. He had built empires, signed deals worth millions, and earned the respect of powerful men, but none of it filled the silence that followed him home. He could have anything he wanted except the one thing he couldn't buy, the simplicity of the love he once had and lost. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling absent-mindedly through emails, but his mind kept returning to her name. Finally, he picked up his phone and called his assistant. "I want a report on all the employees who attended that meeting at the cafe," he said casually, masking the emotion behind his tone. The assistant agreed, unaware of the real reason behind the request. The next day, Aisha's office buzzed again with new rumors. A major new project was being launched, a high-profile collaboration that could put their company on the map. Teams were being reassigned, and only the best-performing employees would be chosen. Aisha didn't even consider applying. She was used to working behind the scenes, but that afternoon her manager called her into his office. He looked strangely formal. "Aisha," he said, glancing at the folder in front of him, "the client personally requested you to be part of the new team." She blinked in confusion. "Me? But sir, I'm not—" "You've been recommended," he interrupted almost impatiently. "Apparently someone noticed your work during the last event." Aisha felt her heartbeat quicken. Someone noticed. She didn't need to ask who. It had to be Arav. A part of her wanted to believe it was just a coincidence that her hard work had finally spoken for itself. But deep down she knew. The thought made her both grateful and uneasy. She didn't want pity or favors. She wanted to rise on her own. Yet another part of her heart, the part that still remembered his kindness, his laughter, couldn't help but wonder if fate was gently stitching their paths together again. The new project was demanding. Late nights, endless revisions, and the constant pressure of perfection surrounded her. Yet she thrived in it. For the first time, she was part of the main circle. Her opinions sought, her ideas valued. Slowly, she began to regain a confidence she hadn't realized she'd lost. And sometimes, when she stayed late, she'd notice that the reports she needed or the data she struggled to access would already be prepared, waiting on her desk. She didn't know who was doing it. But somewhere deep in the shadows of the corporate world, Arav was quietly watching over her progress. He never interfered directly. Instead, he guided from a distance, recommending her for opportunities, shielding her from petty office politics, ensuring her talent was recognized for what it was. But what he didn't expect was how much she would evolve in front of his eyes. Through glass walls and reports, he saw her grow, no longer the shy girl who once blushed at his jokes, but a woman who stood her ground, who handled pressure with grace and fire. And with every passing day, admiration replaced regret, and pride replaced guilt. One evening, after a long board meeting, Arav found himself standing at the window of his office, the city lights flickering below. His friend and business partner Imran entered and noticed the faraway look in his eyes. "You've been distracted lately," Imran said lightly. "What's her name?" Arav didn't answer immediately. He smiled faintly and said, "Just someone I never stopped thinking about." Imran chuckled and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one over. "Then maybe it's time to stop thinking and start doing." Arav's gaze turned distant again. "She deserves peace, not my chaos," he said quietly. But destiny doesn't wait for permission. The project soon won national recognition, and the team was invited to a grand event hosted at one of Arav's luxury hotels. Aisha, dressed in a graceful pastel sari borrowed from her neighbor, walked into the glittering ballroom feeling overwhelmed by the grandeur. As cameras flashed and music played softly in the background, she clutched her file tightly and focused on her purpose, to present her part of the project with confidence. Halfway through the event, as she stood on stage presenting, her voice calm but strong, Arav entered the room. For a moment, the entire crowd seemed to fade away. His eyes found her instantly. The light from the chandeliers reflected in her eyes, and he felt a pang of emotion he couldn't name. This wasn't the girl he once loved. This was a woman who had fought battles no one saw and still stood tall. When she stepped off the stage, their eyes met once more. This time there was no confusion, no fear, Just a quiet acknowledgement that both had walked through fire, but only one still carried warmth instead of scars. He walked toward her slowly, every step heavy with memories. She looked up, calm yet trembling within. "You did incredibly," he said softly, stopping in front of her. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice steady but her heart thundering. He hesitated, as if holding back 1,000 words. "You don't have to call me that, Aisha, not anymore." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a heartbeat the world went still around them. There were no cameras now, no wealth, no power, just two souls standing where life had once left them apart. And in that moment, both of them understood something deeper than love. That sometimes fate separates people not to punish them, but to prepare them, to make them whole enough to meet again, not as halves seeking completion, but as equals who could finally choose each other freely. The offer she couldn't accept. The night of the grand event lingered in Aisha's heart like a melody that wouldn't fade. She returned home long after the lights had dimmed, after the applause had faded into silence. The city slept outside her window, but her mind was wide awake, chasing the memory of the way Arav had looked at her, proud, soft, almost apologetic. There had been something unspoken in his eyes, a weight of words he never said. She sat by her small desk, the same one where she had written her job applications months ago, and stared at the little lamp casting a warm glow on the cracked wall. Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, she whispered to herself, "I'm not the same girl he once knew. I can't be." Yet her heart, traitorous as ever, still fluttered at the thought of him remembering her after all those years. The next few days at work were a strange mix of calm and tension. Her colleagues looked at her differently now, some with admiration, others with envy. The presentation had been a success, and the company's name was all over social media. Aisha's name appeared in internal newsletters, mentioned as one of the key contributors to the project's success. For her, it was surreal. She didn't crave attention, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of being seen for her work and not just her silence. Still, a quiet unease shadowed her joy. Somewhere deep down, she knew the chapter with Arav wasn't over, and she was right. On a quiet Friday afternoon, as she sat in her cubicle finishing reports, her manager walked in with an unreadable expression. "Aisha," he said, pausing by her desk. "The chairman wants to see you." Her heart skipped. "Chairman?" she repeated softly. The chairman of the board, the man who owned the parent company, was none other than Arav Malhotra. Her first love, her lost dream, her ghost of yesterday. She followed her manager into the glass-walled executive office. The space was elegant yet minimalistic. Polished marble floors, soft white lighting, and a large window that overlooked the skyline. Arav stood by that window, hands in his pockets, his dark suit perfectly tailored but his expression distant. When she entered, he turned. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. "Thank you for coming, Miss Aisha," he said formally, though his tone was softer than his words. "Please sit." She obeyed quietly, her palms resting on her lap. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. He finally spoke again, his voice calm, steady, but heavy with something unspoken. "I watched your presentation the other night. You've changed, in the best way possible. You've grown stronger." Aisha smiled faintly, not sure how to respond. "I've had to," she said softly. He nodded, looking down for a moment. "I remember when you used to talk about your dreams. You wanted to build something of your own, something that mattered." He walked toward his desk and picked up a folder, sliding it across to her. "This is a proposal for a new foundation, something that supports young women in education and business. I want you to lead it." Her eyes widened. "Me? Sir, I don't think you can," he interrupted gently. "And I know you will. I've seen what you can do when no one's watching. You've earned this, Aisha." For a moment, she was speechless. It was the kind of opportunity people waited their whole lives for. Yet her heart sank. Because she could feel it. It wasn't just a professional offer. There was emotion woven between the lines of his words. This wasn't just about her capabilities. It was also about him, about redemption, about a man trying to fix the past by rewriting her future. She took a deep breath, then looked him in the eyes. "Arav, I'm grateful, truly, but I can't accept this." He blinked as if the air had been knocked from him. "You can't. Why not?" "Because I know what this is," she said softly, her voice trembling but sure. You feel guilty. You think this is how you can make up for the past, for leaving, for forgetting. But you don't owe me anything, Arav. You've worked hard for your success, and I've worked hard for mine. I want to build my future on my own terms, not as someone's project of redemption. He stared at her, the words sinking deep. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not as the billionaire, not as the man in control, but as the boy who once sat under the banyan tree and dreamed of simpler things. Her refusal wasn't pride. It was strength. It was the final proof that she didn't need saving. You think I'm trying to buy forgiveness, he said quietly, almost to himself. I think you're trying to make peace with your heart, she replied. But the truth is you don't have to fix me. I was never broken. I just needed time to find myself again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence between them. Then Arav sighed, a slow, heavy sound that carried years of unspoken emotion. You're right, he admitted finally. I did feel guilty, but not for leaving, for forgetting who you made me want to be. Her eyes softened, but she stayed silent. He continued, his voice quieter now. You were the only person who ever believed in me before I became this. He gestured to his office, the empire he had built. I wanted to believe that giving you something back would ease that ache. But maybe what you said is true. You don't need me to give you anything. I just need you to remember, she said, her voice like a whisper breaking through glass. Remember who we were, and who we became because of what we lost. Arav closed his eyes briefly, as if the weight of that truth was both beautiful and unbearable. When he opened them again, there was a different kind of light there. Not longing, not guilt, but quiet respect. Then promise me one thing, he said gently. Whatever path you take, don't stop believing in yourself. Don't let anyone tell you that you're less than extraordinary, she smiled faintly. I won't. When she stood to leave, he didn't stop her. He didn't call her name or reach out his hand. He simply watched her go, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hallway like the end of a chapter. Yet as the door closed behind her, Arav knew one thing for certain. He would never forget her again. That night, Aisha walked home beneath a sky streaked with stars, her heart calm but full. She had turned down a billionaire's offer, walked away from the man she once loved, and chosen the harder road, the road of self-worth. And as she looked up at the stars, she felt something powerful stir inside her. Maybe love wasn't about holding on. Maybe it was about letting go, about becoming strong enough to stand alone and still wish the other person well. Little did she know, life wasn't done weaving their fates together. The storm had only passed to make room for something far more unexpected, something that would test the strength she had just discovered in herself. When the billionaire fell, and she rose higher months passed after that difficult conversation, and Aisha's life began to shift in ways she never expected. Turning down Arav's offer had been the boldest thing she had ever done, and though it had left her uncertain about the future, it had also filled her with a strange peace. She had chosen self-respect over comfort, principle over pride, and her own voice over someone else's influence. That decision became the foundation of the person she was about to become. Every morning she walked into her small but lively office, a modest workspace she had managed to rent with her savings, and looked around with quiet pride. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. On the wall behind her desk hung a single framed quote she had handwritten herself. Start small, but start with your truth. Aisha had started a consultancy firm that offered project solutions for small businesses run by women. It began as a whisper in a city full of noise, but her sincerity gave it a heartbeat. She didn't chase clients. She helped people. Her warmth, her professionalism, and her willingness to guide others without ego soon caught attention. Slowly, her name began circulating among those who mattered. And yet, despite her rising recognition, she remained grounded, walking to work, cooking her own meals, and spending evenings reading near her window. Meanwhile, in the upper floors of the city's skyline, Arav's world had begun to shake. The empire he had built over the years stood tall, but its foundation was cracking under the weight of greed and betrayal. One of his closest partners, Imran, the very man who had once encouraged him to face his feelings, had made a series of unauthorized investments that jeopardized their company's credibility. The scandal broke like a storm, hitting media headlines and social platforms. Investors panicked. Shareholders demanded answers. For the first time in years, Arav's name wasn't being praised, it was being questioned. He spent sleepless nights in boardrooms, surrounded by silence and regret. Every decision he made now carried the weight of 1,000 eyes waiting to see him fall. His team looked to him for answers, but inside he felt hollow. The man who had once been unshakable now doubted his own instincts. He sat in his vast office one evening, staring at the city lights that once were prey.